I'm R.A. Schwartz, and welcome to the Winsidr Show, where it's all about the W. Since the start of the W, players have gone overseas to build their craft and, yes, get paid. And the road is a two-way street. While there has constantly been international presence in the W, making giant impacts, think Lauren Jackson, Penny Taylor, Erica DeSouza, and Jonquel Jones. But these days, things are changing. The wave of international talent has knocked the W we know on its butt. Every year, more and more overseas talents are making major impacts in the WNBA. Now more than ever, international scouting is integral to building the W roster so that you can succeed, but also so that we can cover the league. I'm very honored to have this episode, my guest, an international expert, somebody I go to get information on these overseas talents, Alford Corriette of HerHoopStats. So let's cut to the basket and get right into it. Before we get into today's show, just a quick reminder. Winsidr is fully independent WNBA coverage, and everything we do is supported by listeners like you. If you enjoy what we're doing here, you can help keep it going by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/Winsidr. That's patreon.com/Winsidr. With pricing levels for everyone, you're directly supporting the work we put into covering the W year-round. We've also got a full team producing great written coverage over at Winsidr.com. That's Winsidr.com. Plus more content than ever across TikTok, Instagram, Blue Sky, Twitter, and YouTube. If you're in the market for WNBA gear, check out the affiliate links in the show notes and on Winsidr.com. You get to rep the league, and Winsidr gets a little support along the way. Welcome back to the show. So excited to be here. Alford, I am extremely excited, mostly because finally we're moving from me annoying you on social media about educating me on all these players because you are much wiser than me. I know I follow your work, obviously. I'm sure many of our listeners do. So very excited to pick your brain on these overseas talents that you've had your eyes on leading up to this draft and the future of the W. So very excited to be here with you. Welcome to the show. How you doing?
Oh, thanks, Ari. I really appreciate that intro. It makes me feel special.
You are special.
I appreciate that. And, I'm glad to be here. Glad to be finally on the show. Glad we can chop it up. So let's get into it.
So we were chatting a little bit before, and with all of this, the draft and everything's going to be condensed. And when we're going to talk about a few players that you've had your eyes on, some international skilled players who seemingly, or as we expect, as the smarter minds say, are going to be making impacts in the W, whether it's this year, whether it's next year, whether it's a few years from now. These are players that are top of mind when we talk about this. And it's very interesting to me because I, for one, understand how hard it is to cover these, to follow those overseas players. I, for one, have tried very hard for many years to get into the overseas leagues, to pay attention to it. From my perspective, I always tried to view it from the W season is so short that these players are going overseas and spending more time and more games overseas than they are in the W. So often their player development, their player growth, more of it is coming, or more, signs of what we can expect in the W are coming from overseas as opposed to traditional sports, the NBA or the NFL or NHL, we're looking at training camp to kind of expect where these players are going. So I, for one, first of all, just want to tip my cap that you're able to do this. You're probably up at like 2 a.m. or like watching games at the most ridiculous times all the time. Ridiculous question to ask. How many different platforms have you given your email information to so you can watch all these different leagues?
Oh, I've definitely given my name to a lot. I'm typically watching as many leagues as I can. So it can be France, Turkey, Italy, Spain, Australia, China, say sometimes even South Korea or Greece, or just, keeping a wide canvas just on talent out there. So that email definitely has gotten some usage. So I call my email a high usage starter. So definitely has been fun to get that out there and, get all the access to the different leagues.
And it must be so hard for you because just in the sense of how different each league is, so often from a WNBA perspective, you have the W, and then, you look at Euro Cup or Euro League, and then you have the national leagues, Australia, The Australian League always gets a lot of attention for the physicality. Obviously the Turkish League gets a lot of attention. Back in the day, the Russian League was pretty premier. And now it seems like we're getting a lot of like one or two really good teams in different national leagues. Obviously, that's how Euro Cup, Euro League are kind of set up. But I find it really interesting, and it must be so difficult for you. Like, I guess this isn't like a formulated question that I thought of. I'm just rambling now and thinking about this. But like, when you look at a team playing, let's say that's in the Turkish league, Fener, let's say, how do you differentiate between when they're playing Turkish league games versus like EuroLeague games?
Sure. So I think, when you're looking at, and that's a very good question because I think that's something a lot of newer fans looking at the international game have to think about. With a team like Fener usually has, the top of the top line talent, not just in the Turkish domestic league, but in probably all of basketball outside of the W. When you think of a team with Emma Meeseman, Caleb McBride, Ileana Rupier, just names upon names. I think you have to really look at it as, are they facing comparable teams in a sense? You have some teams in Turkey that do have WNBA level talent in their own right. You look at a team like Mersin that has players like Luisa Gaiselsota and Kennedy Burke, and some top European names like Laura Juskaite. But then you also have a team like Besiktas that, recently added Bree Frazier, but has had Sammy Whitcomb, Amy Okonkwo, another top Euro talent, Mariela Fasula, or it could be another team like, even not necessarily as name brand, but maybe MLAC, for example, that also has names that aren't necessarily in the W, but they also have Astu Endor, who has played in the W. It's really about trying to find games where it's really comparable teams, because you do have some leagues where, you have teams that are stacked at the top, like a Fener, like a Besiktas, like a Mersin, Galatasaray, who also deserves mention. That's also in the EuroLeague.
I was gonna say, if you don't bring up Galatasaray and you've mentioned those other Turkish teams, there's gonna be some angry fans. So I appreciate you bringing it up. All right.
I know. So you look at the Turkish league, they just have a lot of top teams, but then they also have some teams that are kind of stuck at the bottom. For example, one team that I'll bring up is Kanakkale, that doesn't necessarily have the level of talent of a Fenerbahce. Earlier in the season, they had to play they had Aero Powers, for example, and some of their games were a little bit more competitive, even though like a lot of those upper teams just had a clear competitive advantage. But now that they've lost some of their top players, those games are pretty much in a blowout. So okay, that's a team that isn't really going to have a great game against the Fenners of the world, against the Galatasarays of the world, against the Mersins of the world. So this is why I think it's important to really watch these leagues in detail, so you can kind of keep up and see like, okay, who are actually these top teams? Who are these matchups that are really worth watching? Because again, I think as a fan, you definitely want to see a game featuring the best players rather a game that's going to be a 30, 40 point blowout by halftime.
And that makes me think of so many WNBA players. They go overseas, like a Jessica Shepard, for example, a player who overseas is putting up video game numbers like 26 and 15, 20 and 20, like just ridiculous numbers night after night after night. And she comes to the league, and obviously I feel like there should be some math to this or science to this, in the sense of like, yes, when she comes to the W, her skill set, like, she obviously, you're not the center of the attention of the universe on the Minnesota Lynx or whatever team she's going to be on in this coming season, if we have a season. But so how do you, as somebody who's watching these games, scouting these players, reviewing these things, how do you, I mean, it's the talent they're going up against, but it's also, on some of these teams, and maybe they are a EuroLeague team or a Euro Cup team, but that player who in the W is a role player, a middle of the pack player, but in overseas, that team is built around them. That team is them. How do you kind of grade on a curve? I don't know if that's the right terminology, but I think you get what I'm saying.
I think one example of a player I use that I watched heavily before this past W season was Monika Komakani. And she played for a Charnay team that was in Euro Cup, but not necessarily in EuroLeague. And, one of the things that really impressed me about her was, she had a very elite pull-up jumper. The handle was elite. The quickness was top-notch. but then she also had, very solid games against those EuroLeague level teams. And I think when you're watching those type of games, the strength of who you're playing is the main thing. But I think you also want to look for those transferable skills. How are they decision making? Are they making quick decisions that can translate to a WNBA game setting? Are they getting efficient shots? Are they someone that's making correct decisions in pick and roll actions? Like how quick are they making those decisions in pick and roll actions? How much of the shot clock they're using in whatever that they're trying to do? Is that something that's going to be comparable to a WNBA level where the speed is definitely much higher, the physicality may be a little bit more, but then also trying to kind of gauge and find that balance between what they're doing, how effective they're doing it, but against who they're doing it against.
Yeah, and I kind of, for WNBA fans who maybe are more accustomed to college hoops versus overseas hoops, I would make a comparison to, no one come at me for this, but like a Charlie Collier back a few years back. Or there's some players who in college, because there is so many teams, there's so many players playing, there is going to be, I don't want to say a more watered down product, but you're going to have stronger teams, and then you're going to have some more watered down teams, for lack of a better term. Where there's certain players who are dominating that league that they're in. A Charlie Collier in college dominating. And there was that debate. There was that question coming into the pros. How is it going to transfer? How is it going to work? Because I think sometimes, especially in college, you have players that are physically more gifted and they can take advantage of that because they're going up against, they're playing ridiculous amounts of games. And some of those games, you sleep on, you might get your butt kicked, but like there's some games you can probably sleep on. And so it's hard. I understand what you're saying. It's hard to transfer that over, but you need to be paying attention to those minute details and trying to always keep in the back of your mind the WNBA and that level of play and that skill set. Do you often, or do you ever, I guess, when you're watching these international games, the overseas season's long. Do you ever forget what the W is like and have to like rewatch some film of the W to kind of remind you to recharge those mental notes?
Well, yeah, I think it happens from time to time, especially like the one thing you never really want to get wrapped into is kind of thinking like, okay, this is like the highest level of basketball standards, and that's not necessarily a detriment to EuroLeague or the overseas league. It's just that sometimes if you're trying to make a WNBA level comparison, you have to make sure you're keeping in the back of your mind, okay, this is what WNBA level basketball looks like, and a player can be, very talented, can be top notch in a particular league, or it could be EuroLeague or EuroCup, but do they have things that, you see from WNBA players that you see similarities in them?
Mm-hmm. And that is a good intro to what we're really here to talk about. I mean, I teased this when we were chatting before, how we should like discuss the disparities between teams that actually invest in overseas scouting and things like that. And you rightfully pointed out that would take us hours and probably get us in a lot of trouble with some of the things that we might say about certain teams. So we're not going to go there. We'll leave that for another episode. This is just part one. We plan to discuss, I think we said like what, 4 players today. And then we have a few more players that are little bit more later in the draft, or maybe bench role players, things like that. But these are more impact players that we're going to discuss today. And I'm excited because these names I've read. So I'm going to try and avoid as much as possible until you say their names first, because I've read them. So I might have read them wrong, and then I'm just going to sound like a fool. But I'm excited to kind of pick your brain about this, because so often, we're leading up to the draft. Everyone's talking about all these different players, where they could fall. Is this player generational? Is this player not generational? Does this player have a singular generational talent? Those are the discussions that I kind of hear and think are going on right now. And often we're very limited in our knowledge of the overseas players. And every once in a while, there's one player who is discussed as, she's going to be a top 3 pick. She's definitely number 1 or definitely number 2. And, obviously there's nuance and different opinions and things like that. But so often it's like a one clip, right? We hear this is the, like, I'm blanking on who are the overseas players of like the past couple of years, because I'm looking at a list of these current ones, but like as they're coming over, as we're getting ready for the draft, we see like one clip over and over, and it's like, this player's amazing. She's gonna dunk, Dom Malonga. Like, oh, she's gonna dunk it left and right, and like that's the only thing anybody ever knew about Dom, really, like coming into the draft. And I'm not saying everybody like you. I mean, everyone like the typical fan. And so I'm excited to learn. So talk to me about your list. Who we got?
Great. So the main players we're going to key in on for this part one, we have our fam that has definitely been the source of conversation. We have Nel Anglama, who is overseas in France. We have Iana Martin Carrion, who also is overseas with Spain. And then we also have a name that some may not be as familiar with is Frida Buna, who is part of the German national team. A little bit older, and we can get into that later, but she is also one that we can discuss today.
Let me ask you something. And this is a ridiculous question because I like to ask ridiculous questions. Since you cover so many international teams, how many languages do you speak? Or do you just use Google Translate a lot?
Yeah, Google Translate, you start to learn a lot, with different things. But I always find it funny. I was talking to a couple of friends previously. I told them that like the funniest part about watching overseas is you get to learn the words and different things. So when you hear them on commentary, it's like, okay, you know a little bit of Turkish now. Okay, you know a little bit of Italian now. You know a little bit of Spanish now. So I think that's the fun part. But for me right now, it's just English, a little bit of Spanish, and a little bit of French.
All right. I like how you're downplaying that. That is extremely impressive. Okay, who do you want to start with first?
Cool. So yeah, I think we can go with obviously the main one that has been floating around. Oh, is she gonna go number one? Is she gonna go number two? Is she gonna go number three? Let's go with our fam. So our fam currently plays for Valencia in Spain, and Valencia is a EuroLeague team, but it also competes in the domestic LF Endesa. And this is a player that has been talked a bit a while overseas, but now has really been thrust into the more American and national spotlight when you think of a player 6'4", 19 years old, but brings such an eclectic blend of versatility, length, mobility. When you watch her games, you see things that stand out, like her footwork, especially in the post, just the fluidity of her overall movement. Someone who's a high-level passer, especially back to basket, able to locate cutters, able to locate open players, just the processing that's on the floor. However, there are some questions that, when you watch your game sometimes, especially for someone that's playing in the front court as a big and someone that you want to project as a next level big, there's been questions on, okay, does she have the full motor sometimes when it comes to rebound on the basketball, when it comes to the defensive end of the floor, even though she has shown flashes that she can be a quality defender, especially guarding on some high pick and roll stuff, guarding in the post, has shown flashes of being a shot blocker at times. But I think when you look at our fam at 19, I will say I was a little bit slightly more polished than Dominique Malonga coming into the draft, but maybe not necessarily as much of the explosive athlete that Malonga was in her season with Asvel Lyon. Now, if you look at the statistical numbers, as there have been debates on this, on, okay, well, she's not necessarily putting up the numbers as Dominique Malonga, but I think when you look at our fam, she plays a totally different role to what Malonga was leading up in the draft. We look at our fam, she's playing on a Valencia team that's just rife with talent. When you think of Leonie Fibic, Raquel Carrera, now they added Nia Coffey, they added Yvonne Anderson, who was also another quality overseas player. It's Elena Buenavida, who's been part of the Spanish national team system. Like, they just have bodies upon bodies where it's just really a plug and play system that they play overseas. However, you look at her numbers, averaging in Spain's domestic league just under 10 points, around 5 rebounds, shooting 60% on twos. The 3-point percentage is hovering in that low 30s area, but she has shown that she can knock down perimeter shots, especially playing on some pick and pop actions. Valencia sometimes likes to do a lot of the empty corner stuff with her to really free her up. And then in EuroLeague, averaging about 7 points, 4 rebounds. But again, where I say it's important to kind of take into context the role she's playing, because there's so many other quality players on Valencia. Another player to mention is Kayla Alexander, who sometimes starts as their big, who's also 6'4" and has tons of overseas experience. It's hard for a 19-year-old player, especially when you're playing with such established professionals overseas, to really be that consistent, number one option all the time. Whereas with Dominique Malonga, she was playing for an Asvel Lyon team that was really, really young, that people don't take into consideration, where her and Eustace Josite, UTD were the main options on that team, really, at 19 years old. And it definitely, helped Leon at times, but there were also moments where you can kind of see the relative inexperience and the youth of that SV Leon team. But that was an entirely different situation to what our fam is now. But I think when you look at someone at 19 years old that has so much raw tools, but then also has the footwork, has the passing, I think that those are the type of skills that you want from especially a big in this modern WNBA, and why you have so many teams that look so highly upon her.
Yeah, I think, look, if you look back at like the last 5 drafts, I feel like every year there's been one or two of those lanky bigs that can stretch the floor overseas, who have kind of been, highly sought after, highly spoke about. But a lot of them are around that 19, 20-year-old age. And you're like, okay, let's kind of weigh. And it's really hard, honestly, when it comes to scouting for this season, because 80% of the league is a free agent. So we don't know in terms of what teams are looking for. And I think with FAM, it's kind of like, you know, are you looking for somebody right now? Are you drafting one of these players for right now? Because a lot of these other college kids who, are talked about in that top 5 draft pick also are older. They have more of that experience. But on the other hand, I was going up against pros overseas. And so it's this give and take of like, with Diamond DeShields, who left college to go play overseas professionally, then came to the W. And I'm always like, so one day I wake up and I'm one side of the bed. The other day I wake up on the other side of the bed of what is better, what is more beneficial. Obviously, then there's some players, shameless plug to our last episode with Yardane Garzon, where, she was a player who playing growing up as a 16, 15-year-old got to play against professionals, WNBA professionals, and now is also getting the college experience. So obviously some people are doing it their own way. I'm curious for you. I always look 3 to 5 years down the road as like, that's when we find out, are you, fulfilling your potential, or are you a bust, as they say? Because the WNBA season is so short. And obviously with a young player, I guess for you and your mindset, if you were drafting her, where in the sense of like, oh, I understand this is a slightly more long-term approach, or I think, because I mean, like, look at Dom Malunga this past season, right? First half of the season, obviously she came in a little bit late. First half of the season, really slow moving, getting the wheels going. But then come the second half of the season, I mean, talk about a player who I don't think there was a team. Now, obviously, she was paired with Nneka Ogwumike and Ezzy Megbu, of course. Like, you got other great bigs up there, but I don't think there was a team and or player that disrupted Nafisa Collier better than Dom last season, in my opinion. So I'm curious for you, just in and I hate to just compare the two of them, but like in that sense of a young player with so much notoriety, so much attention coming to the pros, but still young and still a lot of growing to do. Obviously, you kind of said it in a much more intelligent way. I always say it like sliders. Like, some players have more speed, some players can't jump it, and those things get adjusted as their season goes on. Dom obviously had sliders in one way and less in another way, and Awa has it in some ways and less in another way. So I'm curious for you, like, what do you envision for this first season or the first 3 to 5 for her?
Yeah, so I think the first few years of our fams WNBA tenure definitely going to be one of a little bit of an adjustment period, especially because of the youth. You're in a different environment now. You're in a different league to where you're really playing the best of the best every night. So you could have some potential for those little bit of those initial growing pains that Dominique Malonga had. But I think with our fam, why like players like her and Malonga are so special is the fact that if you're able to bring them in right away and they're able to get that WNBA experience and flourish, in year one, in year two, you're talking about a player that could potentially set your franchise up for the next 8 to 10 years. When they're coming in at 19, 20, and they're contributing and looking like a potential quality starter now, what does that look like at 21? What does that look like at 22? And really, when you're seeing a lot of these collegiate players are coming in, they're coming in at 22, 23. So if they have an adjustment period of, let's say, a year or two, you're looking for them to really take that leap at 25, 26. Whereas with the Owl Fams and Dominique Malangas, they're taking that leap at 22. So now it's like, okay, what does that now next 10, 11, 12 years look like for them? But I think, for them, it really depends on what team one selects our fan, because you do have some teams in this upcoming draft are in a little bit of different positions where you look at the season before and probably what their next trajectory is going to be like. But I think the personnel that they have on those teams definitely make our fams initial few years interesting.
All right, let's move on. Who we got next? Nell?
Great, yep. So we can go with Nell Anglama. So Nell has been a player I've been interested in for quite some time, having watched her in previous FIBA youth circuits. So Nell represents France at the national team level. She played as part of the U19 World Cup that we had last year, but she was also named to some of the, training camps and stuff for France's national team as well. But you look at a player that has been phenomenal in France this season. She's averaging 16 points roughly in their top division. One of their top scorers, 6 rebounds, little under 3 assists, but shooting almost 60% on twos as a wing. Because one of the things that Nell Anglama provides is just a very, very high level finisher, a very strong frame at 6 feet, someone that can absorb contact, that can finish through contact, but also is actually an exceptional offhand finisher, which I think is very key for a player, especially a wing coming into that next level, being able to show that ambidexterity and finish with both hands. But she's also showed some flashes of playmaking in the sense that, she can be someone that if you need her to drive, collapse the defense and find shooters on the wings or cutters, anything like that, she's capable of doing that. And that's one of the things that if you followed her over the long stretch, you realize that that wasn't necessarily something or a role she played last season overseas. Her first pro season with BLMA in France, they actually played her more of like a small post, like back to the basket. So she really didn't get a chance to really showcase all of the skills that she can do. But she got that opportunity at the FIBA World Cup. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, wait a minute, Nell Anglama can really do these things. And it's just carried over into this French season where, she's arguably one of their top players as well. So I think a physical wing on the offensive side, someone that has shown that she could be a possible defender as well at the next level because of just how strong and physical she is on the floor. And, she's someone that's really played her way up into being a first round pick. And I think she definitely will most likely land somewhere in the first round. I'll be surprised if she gets into the second round, but because I think she has the type of game that she's playing at a high level. The French league is one of the top domestic leagues in the world. And if you can be successful there, and she's already had, I believe she has as much or surpassed as much 20-point games Dominique Malonga had in that same league the year leading into her drafts, So Nell has been, fantastic overseas in France, and she's also playing in the Euro Cup playoffs. So you have a chance to see her play against some of the other countries' top teams.
So talk to me about a W comparison to, in other words, to dumb it down for us. And then talk to me about her 3-point game.
Yeah, so Nell Anglama, she has that very 6 foot, big wing, kind of like the Benai Jelanis of the world, the Jackie Youngs of the world. Someone that, at 6 feet can handle the ball, that can do many things, has shown versatility. But I'm glad you brought up her 3-point shooting because that's actually an area of development that she needs, because right now Nell isn't the best 3-point shooter or just the best jump shooter overseas. So that's going to be a point of development for her getting into the next level, because she's in the low 30s in France, and in Euro Cup, she's actually around that 28% mark. She has knocked down some, in games this season, but that's also a point where she needs to develop, because especially in this modern WNBA where you think of teams and this importance on pace and space and being able to knock down perimeter shots, that's something that she will need to improve on coming into the W. But I think the thing with shooting is it can be developed. We've seen players, time to time that may not have been the best shooter coming into the W, but really own that as part of the skill set and really improve on that level. But when you look at the physical traits that Nell Anglama has, you can't pass on that.
Yeah, there's a difference between a player who can improve and has shown some highlights, some spurts of that shooting ability and that possibility. And then you have players where that just isn't part of your game. That's nothing to knock. I think about, a Leja Clarendon or a D-Rob, 2 players who are elite finishers, really good players, obviously had amazing WNBA careers, but were never known for the 3-point shot. And it was always this well, why don't you just grow it over the offseason? It's like there's players and like there is a an amount of growth that you can make, and then there's just that's not part of your game. So I really like that. Should we move on? I want to do Frida next. Can we do Frida
Oh,
next?
Frida. Okay, sure. So
I like it. Throw you off your system right there.
cool. Great. Yeah. So Frida Buhner is an interesting one because age-wise, she is much older than her quote-unquote international counterparts, but due to language in the CBA and everything, she would more fall under the domestic rules because she actually had a brief tenure at Florida. So due to the way the CBA and everything is written, if you play at college, you more fall under the domestic rules. But she's played overseas for quite some time now, and she's had a very solid year in LFNDES in Spanish play. She's one of the top scorers, averaging around 17 points per game, 7 rebounds, around 2 assists. She's shooting around 60% on her twos as well. The 3-point percentage in LFNDES hasn't been as great, but in the Euro Cup level, she's actually a 40% 3-point shooter. So I think it's really finding that balance and consistency for her across the leagues, but in general, because the 3-point shot is something she's also had to work on. It's something that she's gradually, year by year, put into her arsenal as a player. And the reason why it's actually more important for her is because if you watch her games, she actually plays more of like a small post role overseas. She's 6'1", but a lot of her game relies on a lot of back-to-basket play. You'll see her posting up a lot more. It's a lot of reliance on the deep seals for the catch and goes. And some of it is a lot of IQ and movement just off of, well-timed cuts, well-timed slips, finding ways to create enough separation for her to get that shot off. Not necessarily the best athlete, definitely on the slower end, definitely may not be the great leaper, but her game is really predicated on where can she find angles, where can she find ways to really be effective. But now that she's actually incorporated the 3-point shot into her arsenal, that's really been helping her a lot.
So I'm going to ask you, obviously, for WNBA comparison to dumb it down for us. But then also what I'm hearing is she's a player that has buy-in. Maybe I'm off. And has a skill set that, like, I'm hearing you are a role player on a really good team. Like, you can be part of it. You aren't the Brianna Stewart. You aren't the Asia Wilson, the Nafisa Collier. But you can be a complementary piece to that and build off of that. Because, I mean, obviously, you look at that German national team. You look at some of the players on that team. That's just kind of where my mind goes. So talk to me a little bit in that sense in a W comparison.
Yeah, so I think to me, she reminds me a little bit of Maddie Siegrist, especially that year coming before the W, in the sense of if you look at Maddie Siegrist at Villanova, a lot of that, back to basket play. And then she kind of had to really open up that perimeter game just because of her positionality and her size in the W at that 6'1", 6'2". And I think that's where Frida is now. Maybe not as, high volume of a scorer that Maddie Siegrist was at Villanova, but definitely of that same build, of that same frame where, she's going to have to continue to find out ways to develop more against W level length and athleticism at that wing spot, because we know right now the W is rife with just phenomenal talent at that 6' to 6'3" position. So the way it's really more the matter of how can Frida Buhner really create that space and continue to be efficient. But then also the main question for her is, will she be able to guard at that level, coming into the WNBA? Because like I mentioned, not necessarily the quickest player, but if she can find ways to, at least, stay attached to players and really guard, especially on the wing, I think she can be a serviceable player in the W.
Love that. It's always so interesting because so many players come over and look, there's overseas players, there's, American college players coming into the league who have great careers wherever they are. They come into the W and it is a welcome to the league moment on the first day of training camp. Yeah. And you got players that you love and they're cut on like day 2. And you're like, what's going on? What's going on here? I think it's always super interesting because it's, you mentioned this earlier. It's about where you go and how you fit into that team for opportunity, but then also what can you show us, right? And the intangibles on the defensive end, right? We often talk about athleticism, scoring opportunity. That's what everyone loves to talk about. Defense wins championships also, people. And so I always find it super interesting because defense is one of those ones I personally, at least, struggle to kind of scout, view, whatever you want to terminology you want to use, because so much of it has to do with the opponent you're facing, the film you have on that opponent, and your coaching staff's preparation for that. So I think, a lot goes into that, but camp is kind of where you get an opportunity, and it's almost like street ball where it's like, those other things don't matter as much. It's you just need to like tighten up your bootstraps and do as best as you can, and hopefully you can show something and continue your growth.
And I think I like that you mentioned the defensive side of that, because I think, as she gets experience playing those high level games on the national team where she's facing, the top of the top in respective countries, like that's the type of mentality she's going to have. And she's already shown it. She's already had some decent performances in the most recent Olympics. But I'm very curious to see like what she's able to do, how teams are able to utilize her. But then also you look at the German national team, one of their new assistants, Julie Beren, she's the coach of a basket lawn team that's, one of the toughest defensive teams right now in EuroLeague. So that could possibly be another pipeline, another source of, how can, you help me in terms of, developing as a defensive player before going into the W. So with Frida, I'd be curious to see if she's a player that a team brings in right away because of, like we talked about, the defensive concerns. But again, at 22, in comparable age to other draftees, she's played against some quality competitions, and she's had some memorable performances against actual draft picks. She's had earlier this season. She had 27 points versus Iana Martin, who we will talk about soon. Her Avenida team, she had 27. She had 19 points against Valencia in the domestic league play. She had 21 points in. No, she had 24 points in her Euro Cup playoff game. So she has had big performances at a pro level that, you may not necessarily get from a collegiate player. But I'm curious to see what the future holds for Frida.
Well, since we're talking about Frida, I just have to give a shout out to Frida Foreman, my fellow redhead, because, why not? All right, we got one more person on the list for this episode. Let me know.
Great. So we will finish off with Iana Martin. Last but definitely not least, she is going to be our point guard for this, conversation. One of Spain's young and one of Spain's brightest. She's been someone that Spain has heralded as the future of their team, as the future of basketball, especially at the guard spot. The former EuroLeague Young Player of the Year, not this season, but the past season when Avenida was at the EuroLeague level. She definitely put her name on the map, showing that she can be a quality and serviceable guard at that level in that 5'8", 5'9" spot, but averaging around 12 to 15 points overseas in that 4 to 5 assist range. Definitely someone I'd call a pick and roll savant, because I think when you watch Iana Martin in screen action, she just has a natural feel for when defenders go over, when they're going under, when the hedge is coming, finding those open players, someone that's able to see the floor very well at a high level, someone that's great at scanning the floor, someone that has great peripheral vision. Sometimes if you watch a lot of her games, you'll see her on those driving attempts. She'll just whip it out quickly to the weak side. It's like, oh my goodness, how did you see that player over there at that size? So that's someone I think that's going to be a very impact guard in the future. However, on the other end, where you may have some concerns is just her size in general at that 5'8", 5'9" spot. There have been plenty of times in season where opposing teams have tried to mismatch hunt against her, try to force switches, try to get her in that post, because they know if you can get that size mismatch, you probably have a favorable advantage there. And then similar to Frida, I think the foot speed is going to be another question for teams, because Iana sometimes has been susceptible to a few blow-bys, and kind of to what we were talking about earlier in terms of finding WNBA comparable teams. She's had to play against Zaragoza, that also plays in EuroLeague, but also has a young point guard in Carla Late. And, in some of those matchups, Carla Late was able to, get by her in that point of attack scheme. So, like a lot of those things are what teams are going to have to put into consideration, that she's a phenomenal passer, a gifted playmaker, someone that can also knock down perimeter shots. She also has a great way of weaving, good body control. But, can she defensively guard at that W level? And if you're a team and you feel comfortable in that, how does that look like on the floor, and what are the pieces you're going to put around her to make sure that everything comes well into fruition?
Maybe it's because I'm a positive guy, but I think of, Crystal Dangerfield, a little bit shorter,
Yeah.
Rookie of the Year.
Mhm.
And if you ask me, should still be on a WNBA roster. I believe at this point she's not. She bounced around so much.
Having a great season, by the way, in Turkey with Kayseri.
Okay, that's what I'm talking about. I love that. You just made my day. But also I think of some other players, some other great point guards that maybe are not the fastest or the greatest of defenders. Um, Obviously, I'm from Minnesota. I'm gonna think about Lindsay Whalen, an elite playmaker, an elite winner, an elite, just an elite hooper. But when I think of Lindsay Whalen, I don't go elite defender, elite speed. Um, I'm curious for you, WNBA comparison, and kind of it's I don't know if anybody else has noticed this throughout the episode. It's really hard for me to not talk about like ideal WNBA landing spots and blah 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 because we don't know the rosters. We know absolutely nothing. Like, yeah, we can talk about I would like, historically this team has done a better job of player development, so I would like them to go there or blah blah. But there's been so much coaching turnaround over the past few years. There is upwards of 80% of the league is a free agent. So really hard for me to not ask those follow-up questions. But tell me some WNBA comparisons and just a little bit more about our game.
Sure. So I think, when you look at Iana Martin, she's definitely cognizant, or she reminds you of, those traditional WNBA point guards like the Courtney Vandersloots, like the Subers, like those type of pure playmaking point guards. I think that's really where you would want her to be. And obviously, I'm giving Iana some of the highest of highest praise of, Subers and Courtney Vandersloot, but that kind of mold of a point guard of that, 5'6", 5'7", 5'8", not necessarily the quickest, but just is an elite level playmaker. I think that's really what you want from Iana Martin.
And that's all we got for this episode. And before I do my little closeout, I want to give you a chance to remind the people. Obviously, we're gonna have you back. We're gonna be blowing this episode up, but remind the people where they can learn more about what you're speaking. Remind the people where they can see your content, your coverage, and give a little shout out to HerHoopStats because
of course
I say this to literally everybody that I talk to. The WNBA has survived for so many years on unpaid labor, because I'm just real about it. Like I'm aware of the landscape of the people who cover the league. So many people get burnt out. So many people put so much blood, sweat, and tears into covering the league at all these different levels. And first of all, so little of that would be possible if it wasn't for what HerHoopStats does. I think they provide a value that I can't put into words of importance, so that we can cover the W as our outlet at Winsidr. But I know that's true for major outlets, ESPN, Bleacher Report, New York Times, whatever you want to say. Like that's where people are going to get information. So I think it's amazing work, but also, like I was saying earlier in the episode, you're the person I look to. When I see you tweet something out, I pay attention. I try and give it as much attention as I can because you're somebody that I truly respect in this space, and I think you have done an amazing job. And it is not as easy as you make it look. So hype yourself up a little bit. Tell people to find your work, and why Her Hoops is so amazing.
I appreciate that. Yeah, definitely. HerHoopStats is definitely one of the amazing outlets out there in terms of providing high level basketball analytics. And we as the platform have branched out to doing other things such as daily newsletters in terms of team coverage, which I do for the New York Liberty, which is where you can find some of my articles on the New York Liberty. You can find us at herhoopstats.com. You can find us at HerHoopStats on Twitter, Instagram. You can also subscribe to the newsletter. But in terms of the international content, you can find me mostly on X at Alford Corriette, or you can just type in Alford Corriette on X, and I'm sure to be there because, there's pretty much no other Alford Corriette out there at this point.
There's not a bunch of people with your name running around.
No, there's not a lot. So, you can find me on X pretty easily. And I try to, make the breakdowns on X, very quick, very concise, to the point. Sometimes you may find some scouting reports there, but definitely that's where you will find the bulk of my work. If you want to see some old stuff, I have a YouTube channel that you can find also at Alford Corriette, where you see more of the longer form content. But yeah, that's basically where you can find me. And again, check out HerHoopStats.
Love it. And to close out this episode, I just want to say thank you to you for joining us, but also to say thank you to the listeners for supporting independent WNBA coverage. Winsidr has been doing this for a long time. HerHoopStats has been doing this for a very long time. And it only works because of the community and to listeners like you. So thank you.
Thank you so much.